September 11th, 1998, St. Petersburg. At 5 in the morning, the silence of Rima Nikolaevna Kuzminik's apartment is broken by the loud trill of a telephone call. A mother's heart immediately senses that something is wrong. Her younger son Sasha serves in the Navy, going out to sea on a nuclear submarine. Maybe something happened to him. Rima Nikolaevna picks up the phone, and her worst fears are confirmed when a commanding and cold voice answers on the other end of the line. "I'm calling you on behalf of the Commander-in-Chief of the Navy, Admiral Koraidov. May I speak to Rima Nikolaevna Kuzminik?" The woman answers timidly, "This is me." After just 2 words, Rima Nikolaevna clutches her heart, and her eldest son Ruslan runs to the kitchen for valerian drops. The woman listens to what the indifferent and stern voice is saying to her, and tears begin to slowly run down her face. "Of course," she says. "I'll fly to Sasha. Can you tell my son that I'm already on my way to him?" "Mom, yes, what happened?" asks Ruslan. When she finally hangs up, Rima Nikolaevna looks at him, but it's as if she doesn't see him. "They called from the army, said our Sasha is a terrorist, said our Sasha shot 8 people and seized a nuclear submarine." The town of Gadzhievo in the Murmansk region is a typical naval garrison in the north of Russia. Grey skies, unwelcoming landscapes, a lead-cold sea from which the heavy hulls of nuclear submarines peek out near the shore. Nature here is strict and serious, like the military. Military service is not an easy duty. The history of the town has been connected with it and with the Navy since its very beginning. It was in Gadzhievo that the nuclear submarine K-219 was once based, which sank in 1986 as a result of the explosion of its own ballistic missile. One of the streets in the city is named after the hero of Russia, sailor Sergei Priminin, who gave his life to prevent the explosion of a nuclear reactor on the sinking submarine and saved the world from another nuclear disaster. The citizens of Gadzhievo call their home the City of the Watch, standing guard over the motherland day and night. There is no place for the weak here, the locals say with pride. Here, everyone's nerves, character, and convictions are put to the test. 19-year-old sailor torpedo operator Aleksandr Kuzminik did not pass this test. Sasha Kuzminik, born in Pita, never aspired to a naval or military career. He simply never considered himself extraordinary in any way. Everything in the Kuzminik family was decided by the authoritative father, and even if the boy had dreams, the head of the family had no interest in them. Sasha's father worked as a turner at one of the factories in Peter. The work was hard, the pay was low, and in recent years things had gotten even worse. Kuzminik Sr. understood that if he didn't want his children to repeat his fate, he needed to give them a better future, higher education, the opportunity to build a real career and not lose their health in the process. And for that, the children had to study hard from early childhood. Besides Aleksandr, there was another child in the family, his older brother Ruslan. Their father raised the boys, strictly deciding who they could be friends with, where they could go, carefully checking their homework, and punishing them severely if any of the children got bad grades. It was his father who enrolled Aleksandr in a specialized school with advanced foreign language studies, even though the boy wasn't drawn to languages and didn't have any aptitude for them. At home, Aleksandr was afraid to speak unnecessarily, fearing his father's anger over a careless word. Their mother, Rima Nikolaevna, loved both of her sons dearly, but she never went against her husband's will, believing it was his paternal right to decide how to raise the boys. When her husband scolded Sasha for getting C's in foreign language, she would sigh, shake her head and say, "Why are you upsetting your dad, Sasha? You need to study harder. After all of this will be useful in life." Lacking family support, the once kind and responsive boy gradually became withdrawn, distant, and unsociable. It seemed there wasn't a single person around him whom he could trust. Sasha acutely felt his loneliness, but didn't know how to deal with it or whom to turn to. Later, Kuzminik would admit to his colleagues, "My father ruined my life." At school, the boy studied passively, didn't attend any clubs, wasn't interested in anything. He had almost no friends or even acquaintances. It was hard for the quiet and withdrawn Sasha to answer in class. As soon as he went up to the blackboard, the words would fly out of his head and his tongue would start to stumble. His classmates would snicker and the teachers would lose patience and send him back to his seat. Sasha became even more withdrawn. The only escapes the boy had were books and television. In books, he could feel like a real hero, save lives, fly to other planets, and bravely fight dangers. And how skillfully television characters stand up to bullies. Who knows, maybe someday Sasha himself will become a hero, and then he will have many friends and everyone will love him. The television in the Kuzminik house was on all day, and if there wasn't a suitable book at hand, Sasha would sit down in front of the screen. He could spend the whole weekend in front of the television. His mother would sometimes say, "You should go play outside, Sashka. It's summer outside, there are lots of kids running around and you're just sitting at home." But his father would interject, if he's idle, he should keep busy with something useful. "Do your homework." Another slacker. Sasha would turn off the television and study. Kuzmin also didn't have much luck with girls. They all preferred guys who were much more outgoing and talkative, the kind you could laugh and joke around with. Aleksandr appeared otherworldly and unsociable, making it challenging to interact with him or find common topics of conversation. After finishing school, Aleksandr Kuzminik followed his father's advice and applied to a university in St. Petersburg, successfully passing the entrance exams. But suddenly, something inside him rebelled, and the young man took back his documents without consulting his father. That evening, a huge scandal broke out in the Kuzminik household. Sasha didn't try to hide what he'd done, knowing that if his father found out on his own, it would only be worse. When the family gathered at the table and his mother was serving hot borscht into the bowls, he mustered up his courage and blurted it out in one breath. "I took my documents from the institute, I don't want to go there." For a few moments, there was complete silence in the kitchen. Aleksandr saw how his father's face first turned pale and then flushed with blood. "What did you do?" he roared, slamming his fist on the table. "Yes, how dare you, you fool!" Grabbing a half-empty plate from the table, Kuzminik Sr. struck his son on the head with all his might. The plate broke. The mother gasped and jumped up from her chair, but Kuzminik barked at her. "Sit down!" He told his son, "Get out, I don't want to see you, get out of my sight." The head of the family raged for a long time, and Sasha tried not to cross his father's path for several days, but there was nothing left to do. Having failed to get into any other place, 18-year-old Aleksandr Kuzminik went to the army. After studying for half a year at the Severodvinsk training center, he was assigned to serve on the nuclear submarine Vepr, which was based in the city of Gadzhievo on the edge of the Kola Peninsula. The Vepr was part of the famous Beast division along with other nuclear submarines, Panther, Bars, Volk, Leopard and Tiger. The submarine was only 4 years old, completely new, with the latest weapons and a quiet engine. There were many young conscript soldiers in the crew along with Kuzmin. Aleksandr approached his service conscientiously, followed orders precisely and never shirked his duties. The commanders instantly took a liking to Yumosha, but his comrades were not fond of him. Kuzminik's childhood unsociability and gloominess never went away and only grew stronger when he was around unfamiliar people. Usually, newcomers tried to make contact with everyone right away, but Aleksandr didn't make friends with the sailors and didn't try to fit in with the group. In the confined space of a nuclear submarine, where crew cohesion and teamwork are more important than ever, the appearance of a taciturn outsider was quite out of place. He annoyed many, and there were even those who openly mocked and made fun of the sailor. Alo remained silent. "Why are you quiet?" "Breaking is also a mechanism," Kuzminik's words followed. Outwardly, Aleksandr did not react to such teasing at all. He had duties that he was supposed to fulfill, and that was what he focused on. The guy had more or less warm relations with Alexei Okonechnikov, with whom they studied together in Severodvinsk. Okonechnikov was friendly and could talk for hours about anything, but he didn't intrude on his friend. Kuzminik was fine with that, especially since a flame of a future breakdown was already gaining strength in his soul. According to the recollections of sailors who served in the Navy in the late 90s, at that time there was a severe personnel shortage on nuclear submarines. Some nuclear submarines were staffed with only half the crew, others even less than that. The resulting personnel gaps begin to be filled by anyone available, often by people who were actually unfit for military service on submarines, including those who were unfit due to their mental health. People who were psychologically incompatible ended up in the submarine crews. The number of violent incidents in the Navy increased significantly during that time. In addition, hazing was flourishing. Young sailors were abused, cigarette butts were put out on their backs, they were beaten and humiliated. Quite often, the command didn't even try to stop such behavior, even though it was especially dangerous on nuclear submarines, where crews spend long periods in confined spaces. According to some sources, this phenomenon was also present on the Vepr. If that's the case, then the quiet and reserved Aleksandr Kuzminik could easily have become a victim of bullying, but he had nowhere to run. Where can you go from a submarine? There were no books to hide behind from the harsh reality. In the submarine, even the walls seemed to press down on him, but outside it wasn't any better. Grey sky, grey sea, unfamiliar, indifferent faces. Descending into the Vepr, Aleksandr felt as if he were going down into hell. Every day it seemed like he wasn't getting closer to discharge, but instead it was moving farther and farther away. Aleksandr stopped sleeping normally and started performing his duties worse. The guy knew that he definitely couldn't complain to the commander, they would just mock him, call him weak, and besides, where could he even go now from the submarine? He had to endure it, grit his teeth, and more often, Kuzminik felt his fists clenching, and the hatred in his soul growing stronger. At some point, it had to break out. On the night of September 10th to 11th, 1998, the nuclear submarine Vepr was on combat duty at the Gadzhievo base under the command of the crew of the submarine Pobratim Volk. Also on the submarine was Petty Officer First Class Ilshat Kuzin from the submarine bars. The next day he was leaving for vacation from service and stopped by to say goodbye to his comrades. Having stayed up late, Kuzin went to sleep in the 12th cabin. The sailor whose bed he took had gone to repair his clothes, getting ready for discharge. This switch will be fatal for one of them and save the other's life. But Aleksandr Kuzminik couldn't sleep. The day before, he had committed a disciplinary offense and now was in his cabin, feeling humiliated. He was boiling inside, not so much because he had been punished, but because of the crew's reaction. While the commander was reprimanding Aleksandr for his misconduct, he heard malicious laughter behind him. He recognized that laughter. Klementev, Motovilov, Militsky. They all mock him. Everyone hates him. He has nowhere to run, and no one will help him. Almost all night Kuzminik struggled, trying to cope with the pain and anger crushing him from inside, and finally at 3:30 in the morning it overcame him. Not yet knowing what he was going to do or how he would do it, Aleksandr Kuzminik left the cabin and went up to the deck of the boat. His legs carried him to the pier on their own. That night, Vepr and the Leopard standing next to the boat from the same animal division were guarded by only one upper watchman. There should have been two, but there weren't enough personnel, and the command decided it was peacetime, we'll manage with one. The crews of the boats would take turns assigning watchmen, who would walk along the pier with a rifle, and if something happened, they would act according to the instructions. When Aleksandr went down to the pier, the watchman from Leopard happened to be on duty. Kuzminik approached him and asked who would be relieving him. The watchman replied that very soon a sailor from Vepr would take over the post. Denis Bachanov. Bachanov. Kuzminik chuckled. He was more than familiar with that last name. Bachanov used to mock him louder than almost anyone else. Satisfied with what he had heard, he said goodbye and returned to his boat. An hour later, Kuzminik went out onto the pier again, but this time with a definite purpose and not empty-handed. He brought with him a blacksmith's chisel that resembled a hammer. And yes, his unsuspecting offender was already standing on the pier. Bachanov was surprised to see Kuzminik. "What brings you here, Tormas? Why aren't you sleeping?" "Yeah, it's just insomnia's been bothering me," Kuzminik replied. Calmly, Bachanov shrugged his shoulders and turned away carelessly. And then Kuzminik hit him on the head, the fractured skull cracked, and the victim, without making a sound, collapsed onto the deck. Kuzminik crouched down next to him to make sure Bachanov was dead and to take the rifle from his shoulder, when suddenly footsteps sounded behind him. It was the damage control watch officer, Captain 3rd Rank Sergei Besedin. As the watch officer, Besedin was supposed to walk around the ship every 2 hours, checking for fires and making sure all necessary hatches and portholes were closed. As he descended the Leopard's gangway, he saw the watchman lying on the pier with a young sailor standing beside him. Besedin, surprised, approached. "Is he sleeping?" As soon as he bent over, a blow with a chisel came from behind. But this time Kuzminik wasn't lucky. The blow was only a glancing one and Besedin only got a concussion. Miraculously staying on his feet, he turned around and rushed at his attacker. A fight broke out. Besedin was stronger than Kuzminik, and he managed to throw him to the edge of the pier, jump up and rush for the rifle lying on the ground. And then luck turned to Kuzminik again. He managed to stumble upon a weapon. Earlier, Besedin heard the sound of a bolt being pulled back and dashed with all his might toward the metal box with the power supply cable. She was walking from the shore toward Leopard. Taking cover, Kuzminik held his breath, aimed into the darkness and fired 3 times. After firing 5 bullets toward the crate, he decided that Besedini was finished. Then, with 2 shots to the heart and stomach, he finished off the still-living Bochanov and ran toward Vepr Besedina. The bullets missed, but one hit the cable track, briefly cutting power to the Leopard. The boat's duty officer went on deck to investigate, but Kuzminik was gone. Meanwhile, the bloodied Besedin made it to the intercom that connected the pier with the Vepr. "There's an armed criminal on the boat," he shouted at the top of his lungs. "There's an armed criminal on the boat." The message was received by the Vepr's duty assistant, Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Kardakov. He immediately sent the Central Post watchman to wake up the officer on duty and rushed up the ladder himself. That night, 2 ladders were open on the Vepr. Only by a lucky coincidence did Kardakov not run into Kuzminik, otherwise he might not have survived that encounter. Kuzminik himself was already in the submarine. He descended to the second compartment, where the off-duty shift, including Ilishat Kuzin, was sleeping. 6 sailors in total. They had no time to comprehend the situation. Aiming carefully, Kuzminik shot 5 sleeping men in the head. Kuzin, the contract sailor, Oleg Motovilov, the sailors Tingiz Rakimov, Nikolai Klementiev, and Sergei Militskom, the 6th sleeping man. He missed in the cabin's dim light. There were supposed to be 2 more people in the cabin, but by a lucky coincidence that saved their lives, they weren't there. One had fallen asleep in the midshipman's cabin, and the other was still fussing around in the boat's cabin with his trousers. After finishing the shooting of his defenseless comrades, Kuzminik went into the first torpedo compartment. Here he sealed the bulkhead door, turned on the boat's chemical protection system, and moved to the third compartment, where about 30 sailors were at that time. Freon! The poisonous gas quickly began to fill the room. The activated alarm system allowed the sailors to put on their gas masks in time and stay alive. Kuzminik knew that from the moment the Freon was released, an alarm would be declared on the submarine, but no one could get to him through the second compartment anymore. He sealed the bulkhead, and the Freon released into the third compartment would force the crew to deal with the emergency first, and only then handle everything else. Kuzminik had enough time to lock the bulkhead. Now the compartment he was in had turned into an impregnable fortress. While the crew was dealing with Freon, Kuzminik calmly walked around his new domain. Perhaps he realized that he was no longer destined to get out of here alive. But perhaps it seemed to him that everything happening was part of a fantasy about a hero who punishes his offenders, and that this fantasy had finally become reality. Suddenly, on the bunks in the first compartment, Kuzminik noticed sleeping people. His comrade Okonechnikov and Vladimir Zhigalov. Zhigalov also studied with Kuzminik at the same training school, but they didn't get along. Since Okonechnikov and Zhigalov were only temporarily assigned to the Vepr and didn't have regular places, they decided to sleep right next to the torpedo. Kuzminik didn't want to deal with Okonechnikov after all. They were friends, but he understood that Alexei would never agree to become his accomplice, especially when it turns out how much blood has already been spilled. 2 shots rang out in the torpedo compartment. 2 more people died at the hands of Aleksandr Kuzminik. After dealing with the unwanted witnesses, Kuzminik disabled the compartment's fire suppression system. Now they couldn't neutralize him with the same Freon. After that, he contacted the ship's command and said he would blow up the submarine's warhead if they tried to storm the compartment. He didn't make any demands. By then, news of the incident had spread around Vepr and Leopard. The crew of the neighboring submarine, having learned how many people had already died, was ready to shoot Kuzminik without waiting for an order. Several officers with automatic rifles took up positions in the conning tower enclosure of Leopard and kept all the points from which Kuzminik could come out onto the upper deck of Vepr under their sights. But for now, he wasn't planning to leave his shelter. Already at 4 in the morning, officers from the Special Operations Department of the Federal Security Service for the Murmansk region arrived at Pers. By a twist of fate, the special forces had arrived in Gadzhievo a day earlier, on September 10th precisely to conduct exercises on neutralizing terrorists who had seized a nuclear submarine. Now they had to carry out the operation in real combat conditions. At first, the Special Forces' attitude was very determined. Their confidence in success was almost absolute, but it soon became clear that exercises had nothing in common with reality, especially if the terrorist is someone who knows the submarine and its weak and strong points well. Kuzminich blocked the bulkheads in his compartment, making it inaccessible. The attempt to blow up the door to the first compartment could have ended disastrously for the entire Vepr because there were mines and torpedoes there, the boat's ammunition. Despite the fact that there was no actual nuclear weapon on the submarine at that time, the danger of consequences was real. Only afterwards, during the investigation, experts from the Navy's chemical service and weapons specialists told the investigators that oil getting into the regenerative substance usually causes a spontaneous explosion. If Kuzminich had started a fire in the compartment, it would have detonated all the ammunition. The minimal consequences of this explosion would be the destruction of Vepr, the destruction of neighboring submarines and the submarine barracks town, as well as the nearest residential area of the city of Gadzhievo to the base. The maximum consequences would be the destruction of the nuclear reactor, which would have resulted in a catastrophe of international scale. According to Vladimir Prikodko, the Regional Federal Security Service Director, the country nearly faced a nuclear disaster. It would have been a second Chernobyl. There was still one more way to access the compartment, the torpedo loading hatch located above it. But Kuzminich had anticipated that possibility too. The elevator doors were locked. At 6:25 in the morning, negotiations began with Aleksandr Kuzminich, and immediately the worst fears were confirmed. He started threatening again to blow up Vepr's ammunition. The sailor, skilled with torpedoes, was tense due to the serious threat. Kuzminich was indeed planning to set the submarine on fire and made necessary preparations during the negotiations. First, he gathered and placed them under the torpedo warhead compartments. Everything that burned well, paper, rubber mats, wooden boxes, oil-soaked rags, could all be used for the fire. He also brought regenerative cartridges here. They are used to purify the air from poisonous gases and to saturate it with oxygen. The oxygen was very useful in the compartment where flames would soon break out. They also tried to talk to Kuzminich, the commander of the Northern Fleet, Oleg Yerofeyev, the local priest, Father Avakum, and also psychologists. But attempts to appeal to reason or emotions had no effect on Aleksandr. He refused to talk to the priest right away. "Father, convince me that God exists. I don't believe." He spoke calmly with the command, like a master of the situation, which he probably felt himself to be at some point. In a dialogue with the deputy commander of the flotilla, Rear Admiral Vyacheslav Shegolev, he said, "You can turn on the music and get ready to die. It'll be more fun that way." And when Shegolev remarked that there was little fun in this, he laughed. "Not for me, but for you." In one of the conversations, Kuzminich admitted that he does not regret what he did, but he only regrets that he had to take the lives of his friends Alexei Okonechnikov and Sergei Besedin. He didn't know that Besedin survived. After the conversation, Kuzminich again refused to surrender but demanded a pistol, alcohol, chocolate and black caviar, which were promptly delivered to him. The news that the nuclear submarine had been seized by an armed man reached the commander-in-chief of the Navy, Vladimir Kureidov. He flew to the incident scene immediately. Alexander's mother, Rima Nikolaevna, and his older brother Ruslan also flew out with a special team from St. Petersburg. By that time, for security reasons, Leopard had been moved to another pier. At 11 antimeridiem, Kuzminich said he was tired and wanted to sleep. After that, he was unreachable for 4 hours. During the day, Alexander's mother and brother talked with him for a long time, but neither their persuasion nor their pleas changed his position. He wasn't going to leave the compartment, and he was also afraid to surrender, fearing that he would be shot right there on the spot. The command tried to convince Kuzminich that no one was going to shoot him, and that everything would be decided by the court. After all, he had committed serious crimes, and there was blood of 8 people on his hands. He would have to answer for them before the law. When he heard about the trial, Kuzminich started talking again about blowing up the boat. The negotiations lasted until almost midnight. At 11:45 post-meridium, Aleksandr was on the phone with his older brother when he suddenly fell silent. According to the official version, after midnight, seeing that Kuzminich was no longer making contact, the leadership of the Regional Federal Security Service office gave the order to open the torpedo compartment. After opening the bulkhead, the assault team almost immediately came across the body of Aleksandr Kuzminik. He was lying by the entrance hatch on the torpedo deck. He had injuries on his head and hand, as if from a small explosion. On Kuzminik's knees lay an assault rifle with 3 rounds, and next to the body were a regenerative cartridge, a half-disassembled breathing apparatus, and a box of matches. As the cause of death, the prosecutor's office and the garrison will state an explosive head injury with destruction of the brain. Apparently, Kuzminik tried to take apart one of the regenerative cartridges and it exploded in his hands. There is another official version of the end of this story, supported by other sources. According to it, Aleksandr Kuzminik did not die, but was eliminated. Federal Security Service officers installed an explosive device in the telephone through which the negotiations were being conducted. When Kuzminik refused to surrender, the order was given to eliminate him. According to the conclusion of the psychological and psychiatric examination, Kuzminik was mentally healthy and sane both before and during the commission of the crime. It was later revealed that during the medical examination, he told the psychiatrist that he sometimes thought about taking his own life. But overall, the report did not find any indications of a mental illness. However, this version is also not universally accepted. Later during the process, there were repeated statements that Kuzminik actually suffered from a mental disorder and used toxic substances. This incident went down in history as the first hijacking of a nuclear submarine in the world. As a result of the investigation, the commander of the Northern Fleet, Oleg Yerofeyev, was punished. For this and other violations, he was later removed from his post, as well as most of the officers of the Vepr. The submarine commander, Oleg Telushkin, was also removed from command and demoted. The rules of service in the Navy were also revised. For many years now, only professional military personnel have been allowed to serve on nuclear submarines. Conscript soldiers are no longer permitted there.